Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 11th episode, or is it the 12th? I'm not sure. I can't remember anymore. 12. The 12th of Facts on the Ground. This is a pretty special edition for, I guess, both of us today. It's the first time we're interviewing somebody outside of academia or or journalism for the outside of politics, and it's someone whom I've known for a long time. He's my friend and musician, Ian Devaney. He currently is fronting a band called Nation of Language, which put out a new record called Ian, want to help me out on this?
Yeah, it's called Introduction Presence.
Introduction, Presence, right?
Yeah.
Which you should all check out. It came out earlier this year. It's fantastic. Prior to that, Ian was a singer in a band called the Static Jacks, which had quite a successful run for several years. And so we wanted to have Ian on just to talk to him about what it's like to be an independent artist working in these days of pandemic, and also about the new record and anything else that might crop up. So, Ian, thank you very much for joining us on this 12th episode.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So let's just give people a bit of a background if we can. You were in the Static Jacks. That's when I met you. I think it was late 2008. You were doing, the band was doing a showcase for Downtown Records, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you want to just give like a brief background or a brief history of the Static Jacks, and then maybe why you guys decided to part ways, and then how Nation of Language started?
Yeah, for sure. So it's funny that you mentioned that show, because I was just kind of telling the story to someone else recently that, sometimes when you start to talk with the record label, they'll set up a showcase so that, they and their people can see what you're like performing. And we didn't really understand the music industry at the time, that like you're going to meet with a lot of labels over the course of time, and you'll play a couple showcases, and that doesn't mean that anything's going to actually happen. But basically, as soon as we got that showcase, we dropped out of college. We're like, that's it. We're going to make it. This is so great. And so we didn't end up signing with Downtown Records. But I would say we did, because we left college, we dedicated ourselves full time to making music. And so it was, we would meet up, it was 6 days a week, and just get together and try to write and practice like all the time. And I think it really helped in kind of focusing us on like just the craft of doing it, of just like sitting down and doing it over and over again, so that you're building these kind of songwriting muscles without really even thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
So then we did end up getting signed after like a couple years of just doing things on our own and playing DIY shows and stuff.
And that was to Fearless Records.
Correct.
Yeah.
Which was different from us, but like in terms of genre, but they said they kind of wanted to start exploring like an indie music direction. So we made like 2 records and an EP with them. And then kind of after the second record, there was a lot of expectation, because there was a lot of touring that we did off the first record, and that was really great.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a lot of expectation with the second record that would continue and elevate. We had like put out a music video that had done pretty well, that is now just gone from YouTube, which is interesting. But
did you say it's gone?
Yeah, I don't have no idea.
You think the label took it down?
Well, it's like it was one of those things where for a while in that period, like mid 2010s, like music videos were put up through a company called Vivo.
Yeah.
And I never fully understood what they did, but I've heard that a lot of Vivo videos are now just coming down ceremoniously.
Yeah.
But so anyway, so while it was still up, the video was doing well, and we were like, oh, this is going to be so great. And then just like nothing happened. Like we would hear that we weren't getting tours because we weren't getting played on the radio, and we would hear that we weren't getting played on the radio because we weren't going to be coming through their city.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just this kind of catch-22 of like sitting around frustrated. And I think the band started to dissolve during that period where people were like, okay, well, what other focuses in life do I have? Maybe I'll start to look at those a little more.
Yeah.
And so it kind of just ended over time at that show. And then I think I had already started messing around with music that would become Nation of Language during that time. More as just a personal project for myself, because I had only been writing on guitar for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And since I'm not very good at guitar, it felt like every time I picked it up, I was kind of doing the same exact thing.
Yeah.
And it wasn't satisfying in any meaningful way. So I thought to myself, maybe I'll try to just write on keyboards and bass guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when the first song started kind of coming into being. And I recorded them with Mike, who's our bass player.
Yep.
And then some friends, some of whom were in Static Jacks, were like, let's start playing these live. Let's make this a real thing.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how that was the start of the band, really.
Yeah. So,
before I ask you any questions, Ian, I actually kind of just want to fangirl a little bit because I honestly, before Jesse told me about your band, I had never heard of you before. I love indie music. My sister's huge into it. And she's constantly giving me, bands to listen to, check out, singers, whatever. Mm-hmm. So I bought your album yesterday, and I have now listened to it. I was telling Jesse this earlier. I listened to it twice yesterday and 1.5 times this morning. My kids and I had a little living room dance party in my house last night. It's amazing. I'm like an unapologetic stan of like the 80s gloom pop, The Cure, and Tears for Fears and all that stuff. So, and those are obvious influences on the album, which I loved. But something that I found kind of interesting was that you guys sort of like trickled out singles over time. Rather than kind of get an album together. Was that like an intentional strategy, or is that just kind of the way that it happened?
When it started, that was just the way that it happened, because we could only afford to go in and kind of record one song at a time. And so we would record that, put it out, wait a while and just like working and stuff, and then save up, go back into the studio, do another one. And then when it came time to put the album together, we had a couple that we had recorded and not put out yet, and our synth player Aiden and I are married, and after we got married, the kind of we didn't really have much of a registry. We were just like, "Can you give us money?" And so then all of that money went into like finishing the album, and so. Then it became an intentional trickling out of singles that COVID then amplified and extended, because the record was originally supposed to come out in April, and when all of lockdown started, we were like 3 shows into a tour, and then just had to kind of turn around and come back. And at that point, we didn't know how long it would last, so we pushed the record, and decided to keep trickling out singles. But I think honestly that for a band in our position, that tactic was a good one, in the sense that, you know, the way people take in media these days, it's kind of a constant scroll.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you know, if we had put everything out just all at once or done like an EP, we would have appeared once in the scroll.
Right.
And because we did it the way we did, and we were very lucky to have some blogs, especially like Stereo Gum, would write about us because they were into the singles.
Right.
You know, we were able to kind of appear regularly in their conversation, and then
that's kind of why I asked, because it seemed like a really genius strategy, because it allowed you to kind of like build up a base of fans in like a very interesting way, because you don't see bands do that a lot. So yeah, that was just like a really good, I think a really cool strategy, even if it wasn't a strategy to begin with. Yeah, I think that worked out pretty well. You know.
Yeah, it also had the benefit of just something that it can be difficult to navigate, but it allowed me to control to some degree the order in which people heard our songs. Because to me, you know, your instinct is always to kind of put out the songs that you think will be most popular. But that was something that I was afraid of, because especially dealing in the genre that we're dealing with, it's one where I think a lot of people easily write it off. And so I was able to make sure that some of the weirder tracks were put out early on, which to me kind of bought us the room for like in people's understanding of what the band is, to be able to branch off and do whatever.
So yeah, I agree with both you and Misty that that was a wise approach, and it seems like a lot of bands are taking that approach nowadays, whether it's because of the pandemic or just because it's more, you know, it's more amenable to getting people to actually listen to your music. But I wanted to ask you about the band's lineup, because the last time I saw y'all play live, I believe Mike was playing drums, Aiden was playing synths, you were singing, and Andrew, I believe it was playing bass, right? There was a 4-piece. I think it was at pianos. This was several years ago.
Yeah.
So it seems like the lineup has changed, and you know, is Aiden doing the I guess not just the synths, but like the percussion as well, and Mike's playing bass and you're singing, or what is the lineup actually like now?
Yeah, so I'm just singing most of the time, unless I'm, you know, have to do some synth line myself. Mike plays bass, and yeah, Aiden's station is, you know, the synths as well as the kind of drum play, like, because we record with drum machines, and so it's like the drum playback and the synths that are outside, which you can physically play. And so yeah, it started that way because we did like a self-booked European tour a few years ago, and at that point Mike was the drummer, but he couldn't come. So that's when we switched, like, you know, we recorded with drum machines anyway, we'll just use the drum machines. And it made it very compact, and that whole tour and was, you know, on trains and planes and stuffed in the back of cars, and so it made it much easier to get from place to place, you know, not having amps or a drum kit or anything like that.
Yeah, so that was it just kind of naturally evolved into the trio you are now.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I was wondering about that because, yeah, like I said, the last time I saw y'all play, it was a 4-piece, and I mean, not that you aren't a full band now, but you know, your typical full band of drums, etc.
It used to be, at one point it was a 5-piece because we had 2 dedicated synth players and a bass player and a drummer and me. And so that was kind of, sometimes you would have a synth player who like didn't have anything to do for the first 2 minutes of the song. So this way works out a little better in terms of remaining active in the music for.
Yeah.
So something I always like to talk to musicians about whenever I get a chance is kind of your musical influences. Obviously, the album is, you know, pretty heavily influenced by, like I said, that kind of 80s gloom pop, you know, sort of sound, which my favorite band is 9 Inch Nails, and The Cure heavily influenced Trent Reznor. So that's kind of why I love it so much. So I mean, obviously, you know, that sort of thing influenced the album, but do you have any other like huge musical influences that for yourself personally that you, you know, kind of hold on to?
Yeah, for sure. There's, for the first record, especially, I kind of wanted to hone in on, artists like the Human League, like OMD and kind of early Depeche Mode. But I would say overarching, there's a number of things that aren't necessarily immediately obvious in the music, although people, as they've been writing about the music, have started to include these things on their own, which is kind of gratifying because wasn't sure that people would pick up on it. But there's, like, I mean, early synth bands like Kraftwerk are really important to me, and there's like elements of shoegaze in the music, so like My Bloody Valentine and Slow Dive. And then also kind of because of when I was coming up in music, a lot of 2010s, like early 2010s indie music, like LCD Sound System or The National, things like that, Neon Indian, Future Islands. Those things I think had a big impact on me as well as I was kind of putting it all together.
Yeah, I was going to say that I detect a Future Islands sort of influence. I mean, it's not obvious, like it's not like you're ripping them off, or
right.
But there's definitely an element of that running through. And
yeah, when you said The National, I was like, totally, your voice. Like, there's just elements of like your voice at times, and like even some of the songwriting. And again, it's not like you're ripping them off, but it's like that's kind of, I think that's why when you said earlier that the genre sort of gets kind of not really shunned, but people are hesitant about it. I think it's because so many people have tried to do it and it doesn't work out very well. But you guys crushed it. Like, it's so good. Like, I hate fangirling, but seriously, I'm not kidding when I said I've listened to it 3.5 times already. Like, it's really an excellent album.
That makes me feel good. And it's funny that you mentioned Trent Reznor earlier, because
I love him.
There's a picture that's going around on the internet of like him when he's really young and is clearly into like just kind of like poppy new wave, and his hair is like big and he's got this blazer on. So
yeah. He was not always, you know, Trent Reznor, Prince of Darkness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
Got to start somewhere. So when did you officially release the record?
May 22nd.
Okay.
My birthday.
Okay.
Oh, excellent.
So it's been out for about, what, 2 months now?
Yeah.
Yeah. So how's the response been? I know you said you've been getting some good write-ups and whatnot.
Yeah, it's been, it's kind of like, it's blown me away really, because we've always felt like the primary kind of way we've brought people into the band has been through the live show.
Mm-hmm.
And so the fact that, you know, we were pulled off of a tour early, and then they were basically like, hey, maybe next year you can play a show. I was like, oh, so we're doomed.
Yeah.
That's it. But thankfully, like I think the fact that Stereo Gum and places like Paste had been starting to write about us more, and pay attention kind of through the year leading up to this time. We were able to get like Stereo Gum's writing about us, Paste, NME, Pitchfork, and all all saying the things about the record that I would want them to say. Which was very. It was a very nice thing to hear after kind of going through all the despair of being like it's over.
Right.
And then we also had a lot of really great support in radio, with like KEXP in Seattle and KCRW in Los Angeles and WFUV here in New York. So, it's gone way better than I expected it to when I thought that.
Did you have any reservations about releasing it? Like, did you think maybe we should wait until we can tour? Was there any like fear about, we could release this thing and it could go nowhere because we can't tour? Because as a fan of indie music, I know that the live shows are crucial.
Yeah.
Like that's how you get people into your fan base. I mean, seeing an indie band live, that's so critical. So was there any hesitation, or did you just think, fuck it, we're going to go with it,
Well, it's funny. There was certainly hesitation in the fact that in the weeks leading up to releasing the album, I just kept seeing news that like across all platforms, streaming numbers were plummeting because, people were out of their daily rhythm, I guess, of commuting and like when they would usually listen to music and things like that. And now that people have settled into a new rhythm, I think the streaming numbers have gone back up substantially. But there was also a sense of, well, we can't really wait anymore because like by the time we put out the album, there was only one song that hadn't been released.
Right.
So we were really just putting out like that one song. And we had started to see in comment sections on blogs, people who had been following the band were like, just put out the album already. Singles. So there was a bit of audience wear on that model, I think. But the fact that it would be on my birthday of turning 30 felt like a good way to start the new decade of my life. And so we were just kind of like, let's do it, let's put it out. And if only for the people who have been with us for so long and who have been waiting in whatever sense for it to actually be out fully.
So has the band done everything itself, or are you working with a label?
We don't have a label. It's not all ourselves. Like we have a manager who's really great. And through him, we have people that help us get in contact with like radio stations and pitch us to people like that. And so they've been really crucial in the process. But everything is still kind of, self-funded. And thankfully we've got to the point where, we're on our third pressing of vinyl because we've sold out of the first two pressings. And so things have started to not fully pay for themselves, but it just hurts less.
Yeah.
To pay for anything. Which is really great to kind of bring that down. Because I would say one of the hardest things about starting a band is, and one of the things that worked out so well for me is since I knew I wanted to do it from an early age, I was adamant about saving money all the time.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, nothing in music is cheap if you want to do it at at any sort of like professional level. And so, you know, we were just kind of burning through everything to try to push ourselves up onto that next platform.
Mm-hmm.
So have you guys considered at all doing, like I've seen some comedians are doing like Zoom comedy shows, or, you know, some bands are having, to me, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't really feel like a show. It's kind of weird and awkward, but I mean, I'm sure that there are some people out there who have managed to do it. Has that been something that you guys have considered to kind of help boost the album, or, you know, to get it out there? Or, you know, like, how do you kind of feel about that whole situation of streaming, you know, a show?
I mean, I for me, it really depends on the band. For example, there's another band that I'm in called Machine Gum, with an M at the end. And we did a live at-home performance, and that felt kind of more appropriate because the songs are more easily kind of stripped back and performed in that way. But for Nation of Language, the show is such a, I mean, for one thing, the show is such a high intensity thing that, you know, I couldn't really do it like standing right there. And in, you know, in any sort of meaningful way, especially because of the timing of the album release. You know, a lot of our fans are new, and so for that to be their first experience of what we're like live, I think would be kind of misleading and not help us in the long run.
Yeah.
So yeah, we just chose to.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's probably very band specific. I think that, like I said, there are probably some bands who could pull it off, or there are some, you know, singer-songwriters who could definitely pull it off. But for me, like, a live show is a whole experience. Like, it's a whole multi-sensory extravaganza. Like, that's why I go. So yeah, I think that there are some, and especially like you said, having, you know, being a new album and this being some people's first introduction, I definitely agree with you that might be a little off, you know?
Right.
I definitely think some people can pull it off. The comedy stuff, I don't think works for anybody. It's just not the same.
Our friend was showing us Rufus Wainwright has been doing just songs at his piano from home. And it's like, I don't know, something about his voice just doesn't get as messed up over the phone as seemingly everyone else's, because you're like, this is beautiful. So yeah, I think for some people they can pull it off.
Yeah, I agree.
So, I suppose the whole time I've known you, or the 13 years, which is crazy. No, it'll be 12 years. But you know, I've always known you as a musician, but you've always been working at the same time to, like you said, save money, fund band projects. Has that changed over time for you, for Aiden, for Mike? Are you all still working full time, or is the band becoming more of a focus? How's that panned out?
Well, like Mike and I traditionally have worked in restaurants, and so we've been out of the job since March.
Mm-hmm.
And Aiden is a nanny, and the family that she nannies for will go to a house outside the city for the summers. And so she went out once for like 2 weeks and then came back, and she'll go out again next month for about 2 weeks. And, you know, kind of giving everyone enough time to make sure that their health is okay and getting tested and things like that. And so it's been, I mean, it has been full focus on music. It's actually been strange and this will probably change unless, you know, the additional unemployment benefits are brought back in. But for a while, you know, I was making essentially the same amount that I made when I was working.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like, is this going to feels like to be a successful band. I don't have to think about going to work. I'm just like doing this all the time, and then money shows up. So yeah, it's definitely been full on, writing and recording and like putting together music videos and trying to do all the promo that goes with that. Definitely like a very hands-on, everyday operation.
As someone who worked in restaurants for 10 years, my husband still works in a restaurant. He runs a restaurant. That's like a haven for band people, for musicians. And yeah, I've worked with lots of struggling musicians who, it's because you can't beat the hours. It's very flexible. And, but yeah, being in New York, you guys got hit, you got clobbered with COVID. So, I have a friend from Twitter who also worked in restaurants in New York. He ended up getting COVID, but yeah, New York's been kind of a hot mess. So, what's that been like for, just you guys as a band trying to navigate this whole new, and then being in New York?
We are, where we live is fairly kind of isolated, and I've had a bike this whole time, and we just got Aiden a bike, and so now we're only about like a 15-minute walk from Prospect Park, and so we that's been really great, and I've been appreciating that a lot more these days, because you can go and sit and not be within like 50 feet of anyone, and just kind of be by a tree, which is really nice. So it's been kind of a way to like discover another means of relaxation, kind of, in a weird way. But because of the nature of like being a musician and also working a regular job, there's definitely a sense when you get home from work, you're like, this is when second work starts for me. Like I have to be doing something. And now that music is the only thing that's really going on, it's like finding the ability to relax in the times when you're not doing it has been like a refreshing thing.
It's so interesting that you say that, because I kind of think that that's been a nationwide, maybe global realization that it's okay to slow down. Yeah. It's okay to like just sit on the couch and, binge watch some ridiculous show on Netflix or whatever. I think that's really been something that, for better or worse, I think a lot of people have recognized that it's okay to just relax. We don't have to be doing something all of the time, right. And we can just take a deep breath and just be by ourselves. And so it's so interesting that you say that. Do you think that has, like you said, you're writing music and stuff, has that influenced you creatively at all? Do you think that it's been beneficial for you to just kind of take a step back and just chill and be with yourself?
I think so, because it's, there's just less stress of like, I have to get this done. I have to get this done right now. Especially because, the things that I'm writing now are, to me, things for the third album. And so I'm like, you kind of don't have to get this done right now. Like, you have at least 2 years before you have to get it done. Which, I still do want to get it done, because I like to be as kind of prolific as possible, so that when it's time to put an album together, I have choices in front of me. But I think it has influenced kind of how I've been, I've been approaching it a little more methodically, less frantically, which is a good thing, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Because sometimes it feels like releases from bands do have that sort of aura around them, like they felt like they had to rush to put something out, or fulfill a contractual obligation. So when I was in a band a long time ago, that was always how I preferred to do things was like more slowly and methodically. But you know, it's not always possible, obviously. Um, so just going back to, you know, you said you're working already on the third record, and so you're obviously constantly writing. And I wonder how much I'd like to know, or I'd like to ask how much of what you write lyrically is autobiographical.
I would say a fair amount, although it's often, I think a lot of times when people say that, they think that it means, you know, that the entirety of every song is like about one thing that really happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
Where instead it's more like, you know, this song is, because the lyrics for me usually get written like either midway through or at the end of putting all the music together. And usually it's like the mood of the song will dictate the kind of general feeling that I will want to express. And then it's just kind of mining both your experiences and memories, but also, you know, the scenes that you play out in your head that have never actually happened, but you know, you're thinking about all the time, or that you thought about in the moment. Anything that's kind of contributing to the overarching feeling that the music is generating.
Mm-hmm.
How that goes.
So it sounds more like constructing, like you're constructing a poem than a song, actually. Just coming from a poet's point of view, it's sort of like working with fragments, if you will.
Yeah,
fragments
for sure.
And then just trying to find a way to piece them together that is like somewhat coherent and fits the mood of the mood you're trying to hit. But yeah, I've always been curious about that with the Static Jacks and with Nation of Language too, because you know, you have a lot of songs in the first and second person. So yeah, I've always been curious how much of that was coming from your lived experience versus you know, maybe scenarios or stories that you had come up with. Because I know there are bands who will write songs that sound totally autobiographical, and then when they're asked about the song, they're like, "No, that was just I was thinking about this and what would happen if this happened, and no, it never really happened." So
yeah, so I would say, I guess for us, it's a mix of the two, basically.
yeah.
But it's funny that you say that. It reminds me, I never fully watched it, but there was that Bruce Springsteen special on Netflix, and he talks about how like he writes all these songs about being like a working man, and he's like,
Yeah.
I haven't worked since I was like 18 years old. I'm just an incredible liar.
Yeah. Well, my favorite songwriters are just incredible storytellers. And you don't necessarily have to have lived a story to be able to tell it.
Right.
And so I think like the best songwriters are the people who can tell a good story. And that's really just the basis of it all. But I am kind of glad that you brought up that you sort of write the lyrics sort of like towards the end, because I was going to ask you kind of what your songwriting process is. I'm always interested in that. I know it's a question that gets asked all the time. But I love that process. Has that always been kind of the way that you prefer to write? And like, how collaborative is it within the band when you're writing songs?
It is, I think it, for the most part, is always how I've written. I would say the only times that like sometimes it'll happen in the middle of a song if I just, let's say I've written like the first verse of a song and some melody comes to me, and sometimes along with that melody are just actual words instead of like nonsense blabber. And if those words strike me in some way, then I'm like, okay, I guess we're gonna write music and lyrics as like together as we go along with the song. As far as collaboration, it's like everything's written by me, the instruments and the lyrics.
The synths as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
So, how does that process go for you? Do you just sit in a room and just noodle around, or?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of depends. There's a good amount of things that come from like voice memos on my phone, where it's like I've been on the subway and I thought just like, and then I like go home and I try to figure out over the noise of the subway like what's going on, and a lot of times that that doesn't pan out, but it's often just starting with some kind of, whether it's like a rhythmic sort of beat thing that I've thought of, or a repeating like synth line, and I just sort of let those play and loop them, and then oftentimes bass guitar is the second thing that's brought in, and it's just kind of improvising over it, and then picking out the things that actually sound good and chopping everything else away, and seeing what sticks.
Interesting. Yeah. Because I remember, when I was again, going back to my days when I was a little boy, when I was in a band, we would sit in a basement basically and figure out songs together. So sometimes, I mean, usually somebody would come with a guitar part, at least a little snippet of something, and we'd go from there. But it was always us in a basement, and this was before like you had bands where there were members on the East Coast and on the West Coast, and sending files back and forth. So I think you when you started playing music, there still wasn't really that technology yet, or bands weren't availing themselves of it so much yet. So sort of going from that, the basement beginnings to where we are now, how have you seen things change over time? How has your experience changed over time? Collaborating with people, going from being in person to doing stuff over the internet. What's that been like?
I mean, for me, it was very gradual. Because when I first started writing music with the Static Jacks, it was all just sitting in the room together, and usually putting an unfair amount of burden on Henry, our guitar player, to just like, okay, man, like play something.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, be funny. And then that gradually, I might come in with some chord structure and be like, okay, like we can build off this. But then once I sort of learned how to record myself, increasingly I would almost maybe subconsciously, as a means of presenting the most convincing case for a song, I would start fleshing them out more. And other members started to do that as well. And so we were kind of coming with more complete songs. And so at this point for me, like the writing and the recording process, at least as far as demos go, is essentially the same thing. And so it's, choosing what effects the synth will go through might totally inform how I come up with a bass part, might totally inform how I come up with a vocal melody. And so it's all kind of very built together, and one thing stepping after the other. I haven't had a ton of experience just sending files back and forth, because anyone I've ever worked with has been either in New York or New Jersey, really. But it's certainly, I think David Byrne and Brian Eno made a whole record just emailing back and forth.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely
Strange Overtones is on that.
Yeah.
Great song.
One of my favorite songs.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's been very crazy to watch it evolve and find out that more and more bands are doing it that way, which I think is totally fine, because if anything, it makes, when people are getting together in a basement, it's like, well, now we have more of an experience available to us of how music is created, and it kind of makes each way more special.
Mm-hmm.
There's people doing it their unique way.
Is writing something that generally comes pretty easy to you, or is it something that you feel like you have to work at? Like, I know some people have to like sort of force themselves to sit down and write. Like, they have to schedule it out and they have to, I'm going to do this. Or is it something that you can just like kind of do when it comes to you? Do you know what I mean? Because I'm somebody who, like Jesse, I write a lot of poetry and stuff like that, and it's not something I can sit down and force myself to do. I have to do it when it just comes to me. So I'm always curious, like, is that something that just kind of comes natural, or do you have to work at it?
I would say it becomes natural in the sense that that's often what I want to do for fun. But then I do also have to force it when, oftentimes the first 30 minutes of putting a song together, when it's just kind of like pure spitballing and creation, is when it's easy and fun. And then you hit a wall where you're like, okay, so now I have to like make real decisions about the song structure and the lyrics and things like that. And so that's when it becomes a little more focusing in on the work of, what will help me achieve my emotional goal in this song the best. And so at that point, it's often like, okay, well, I'm just going to sit here and write words and so, like look at poetry books and try and pick out phrases and like force myself to finish this song,
Mm-hmm.
which is where a lot of songs are at for me right now. They're like, music is like 80% of the way there, and the lyrics are like 10% of the way there. And I'm like, this song is going to be so great if I ever force myself to sit down and
Yeah, that's how I feel about my first poetry collection. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah.
Whenever you finish it. I feel that so hard. I relate so hard. That's funny.
So let's talk about the record a little bit. Is there?
As I mentioned, I love it. I really do.
Everybody out there should definitely check it out if they haven't already. It's fantastic.
It's so good.
The production is excellent. Who did you work with to make this record?
We worked with a buddy of ours named Aiden Seifert, and he's in Greenpoint in Brooklyn. And yeah, it was really great. He's someone who has both a lot of technical knowledge and like songwriting experience, but he's also very respectful of, especially the way I write, where I'm bringing in demos that are largely fleshed out. And so he's like, okay, well, so what can we like contribute to this? And sometimes on some songs it's more labor intensive than others. Like there's a couple songs on the record, like Indignities or The Motorist, where they were really short. And, that's when Abe's role in like helping with songwriting really came in, where it's like, both of these, I could see them really just going sort of like spaced out jam.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting to kind of play with that was really nice, and I think elevated the songs in a good way. And then other times it's just as simple as, like this sound on here sounds kind of dinky. Like he's got this huge synth collection. Like, let's pick out some new textures and kind of explore just sort of making noise and seeing what we can pick out of that to bring this together.
Cool. I like that process.
I think my favorite thing about, well, maybe not my favorite thing, but one of my favorite things is that there isn't a song. How do I want to phrase it? There's no,
hits.
Yes, but there's no like lull. There's no like time for me to be bored, or usually, on an album there's like that song you're like, okay, I could do with or do without it. There's none of that, and it's like this great, almost feels like a build up to the last song, and it's just really well done. I'm fangirling again. I should stop.
Definitely, when we were putting it together, we had a vision for it as essentially a collection of singles, and I think for the second record, it will be a bit more of a whole kind of document in and of itself. But to me, like, some review referred to it as, and I mean, I don't mean to be like tooting my own horn here, but they were like, it feels like a greatest hits album of a band that never existed. And
it does. That's a good description. It does.
And so, yeah, there's definitely, like, we wanted every song to be something that could completely stand on its own.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted it to be like a record that was both kind of morose and fun at the same time.
Yeah,
that's exactly what it is. It's just like I said before. It's like that gloom pop from the '80s, where it sounds happy and fun and dance friendly, but then you listen to the lyrics and it's not. Like it's a little sad, but that's my favorite. That's my favorite. I love it. Yeah. So good.
There's we were on this playlist on Spotify called Feel Good Indie Rock, and when we were added to it, we all kind of looked at each other and were like, didn't think we'd make it on that playlist.
Which song was that?
It's kind of like it's kind of like the Foster the People song that's talking about like a school shooting, and it sounds all nice and happy, but it's not.
Yeah. You guys listen actually to that song?
Yeah.
That song's The Wall and I.
Oh, okay.
I think it's just because it's one of the more positive feeling chord progressions on the album, and so you can easily kind of and the lyrics are a little more abstract than the rest of the album, and so you can easily just be like, this is nice. This feels good.
Yeah.
It does feel good, though. Like I told you, my kids and I had a little living room dance party. Like, it is a very fun, musically, it's a very like fun song. But when you listen to the lyrics, then I think that's why I like that style, is because it's very, there's so many layers to it, and it's kind of a fun experience to, enjoy that kind of music, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that juxtaposition as well. And I think as long as I've known Ian's music, he's always had that mix of moroseness, maybe like melancholia, and then dark humor, I would say. You did write a song called Drano Ears, so.
Yeah. I didn't think that was going to end up being the song title.
Yeah. I thought that was a great title.
That is a pretty good title.
So you talked earlier about sequencing tracks and getting to release them in the order that you wanted to. when it came to putting the record together, did you already have that order set from how you released the tracks, or was there another structure you had in mind?
As far as track listing, that was like put together very late in the game. There was a lot of, and like there were things I knew I wanted to go in certain places. Like I knew what I wanted the last song to be. I knew what I wanted the first song to be, and I knew what I wanted like the end of side A and the beginning of side B to be.
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of filling in those other spots was it's a challenge because there's a lot of things that, let's say song A has a certain type of beat that comes in at the end, and that same kind of musical device is employed in this other song, but you forget, and so you put them next to each other when you're trying to draft up a track listing, and you don't realize it until they're right next to each other. You're like, oh no, like that, I can't do that. It sounds like we're doing the same thing
Right.
immediately after. So there's just a lot of a large sense of, okay, what am I forgetting that these two songs have in common that I shouldn't be messing up?
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that would be more difficult too with an album, like you said, that's more of like, a greatest hits or like just singles rather than maybe a storytelling album. Obviously a storytelling album would be pretty easy to sequence, but I feel like it would be hard to, and I'm not a musician, so I have no idea, but I figure that would probably be kind of difficult to figure out a good flow between songs.
Yeah, it's really, ultimately for me, it's like, this is a bit of a detour, but so, speaking of Brian Eno earlier, he and this artist Peter Schmidt have this art project called Oblique Strategies, which is a deck of cards, and each card has a phrase written on it that's designed to, it's like a weird abstract thing, and it's designed to kind of break your train of thought when you're in the process of recording and writing or doing any sort of creative endeavor. And it's interesting because, I would say anyone that you show, only like half of them will resonate. And with everyone you show, it's a different half. But one of the ones that always sticks with me is the card just says, ask your body.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's writing or sequencing, just kind of stepping back from what you think you should do and being like, okay, well, so I'm supposed to be able to like dance to this song. If I go into this movement, does that make me want to stop? Like, or if this song goes into this song, does that mess with the flow of how I'm enjoying the music? And so it's kind of, just a way to quickly pull yourself back from what you're doing. There's another one that's really great. That's it just says, not building a wall, but making a brick, which is, to me, a great way to take the pressure off of you when you are, whether it's putting the structure of a song together or putting track listing together or deciding what songs to put on an album. It's like, think of this as a long-term project and not as the end-all be-all. And this is just one piece.
Yeah.
And so, just with track listing, ultimately that concept of ask your body is what drove us.
I love that.
Do what we do.
What is the name of those cards again? I'm totally writing that down.
Oblique Strategies.
Okay. Because that's amazing. I often need something to like break my train of thought because I get very much stuck in my head. So I will be checking those out.
There's a lot of very silly ones that make people be like, this is stupid. You're like, no, just, it's like buy into it and then just use what strikes you and forget everything else.
Yeah. Yeah, and it might seem stupid on the surface, but you don't really know until you give it a legitimate try. So
yeah, I mean, it's like any sort of like creative endeavor. Every song sounds stupid when you start it.
Yeah, and having read and written and studied poetry for a while, I've come across this idea a lot that every poem is ultimately a failure because it's working within the confines of human language, and language can only stand in for our emotions or our memories or what have you to a certain extent, and then, as you were saying earlier, you kind of bump up against a wall. And I'm wondering if you think the same thing is true for songs. Do you finish a song or do you ever feel like a song is finished, or it's just like, I've exhausted this and I've gotten everything out of it that I want to get out of it, even though it's not the ideal I envisioned initially?
I think for me personally, with music, it's easier to feel like, okay, I'm done, like this is complete. If only in the sense that for me, most things are really complete because when you have the words and you have the music, it seems like the one thing that's missing is like a visual. And for me, a song really feels done when just listening to it, my mind automatically creates a visual. And so that is what really wraps up the song for me, is when it conjures something in my head and gives me, the words, the feeling of the music, and this thing that I'm seeing.
Right.
And that's something that, like, I can tell you, just as somebody who's a new fan, you totally accomplish that, because on every song, I'm fangirling again. God bless America. Yeah, but that's, I'm the same way. I like songs that put me somewhere, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And every song does that, and it really is just an excellent album. I'm gonna stop fangirling now.
Yeah, there's this, like you said earlier, Misty, there's a sense of constant motion, if not at the same speed, definitely accelerations and decelerations, but it makes for a really beautiful rhythm,
and it's a journey. Like, the album feels like a journey, like I'm going somewhere, you know what I mean? And even though it's kind of a collection of singles, it still has that feel of taking you somewhere on a journey throughout all of the songs. So just really well done.
Yeah, and it just puts me in mind of older songs you've written back with the Static Jacks. There was always, every song always had a sense of movement, if not like a character moving through it, then like something transpiring. So I don't know if that's just naturally what's evoked from you when you write, or is it important to have some kind of action, for lack of a better word, or momentum going?
Momentum is definitely something that, like, thus far in my writing has largely needed to be there. And I've started to kind of play with more, I feel like ambient makes people think of a certain thing, but, lowercase a ambient concepts in the songwriting is what's started to become something that I've been trying to see in my head as far as putting the second album together, is having songs that are very, driven by momentum, that then, like, the visual for me is when you're driving through, like, the mountains and there's a series of tunnels. So you get this very fast-paced light blinking by, and then you come into a clearing, and it's like, and there's just this sort of weight taken off of you, and then you just dive right back into the next tunnel, and everything's going by fast again. And so that's something to me that's been kind of guiding what the second record will start to look like.
Sweet. I like that metaphor or simile, if you will. I think you said like, so it must be.
I say like a lot.
I do too. I just noticed that.
Well, you didn't say it in the the annoying way that we all say. You said that it's like something, so it was appropriate.
I say it in the annoying way.
So we can start to wrap up here, but I wanted to ask you, not to force the issue, but I know you've, as long as I've known you, you've been politically aware and paying attention to what's happening in the news, and I just wanted to get your general take on, the upcoming election, the atmosphere of our so-called democracy, and your thoughts on it. And I know I believe it was your brother Kevin who served in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
And he's back home now.
Yeah, he's home, and he left the military a couple of years ago.
Right. Yeah. I think I met him once. It was at that New Year's party so long ago, like 5 years in Brooklyn. So yeah, just overall, I mean, I'm not asking you to endorse anybody or anything, but just I haven't lived in New York for a few years, so there's definitely a different. I mean, I'm watching the news and paying attention to politics and geopolitics all the time. I mean, as is Misty, and that's
right.
primarily what our show is about. But there's still a different pulse living in New Jersey than there is, in the rush of New York. So just what has your experience been over, I guess, even like since Trump was elected up until now, and just seeing what options or non-options we have going forward?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we've been kind of trying to show up at as many of the more recently, trying to show up at as many of the protests as possible, and just sort of like be present, even if, like we went to City Hall when that was going on, and to me, it's like, even if I'm not fully educated on every issue that, as far as, say, like police abolition, something like that, I want to try to make sure I am showing up for the people who are, being put down by the government that's supposed to represent them. So it's, kind of essentially, I think there's like a George Orwell quote when he says something about, if you ever have to ask me whether I'm on like the side of the people or the police, like, it's never going to be the police, basically.
Right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, just kind of trying to be there and show support and like honor the people who have been mistreated or have lost their lives to an unjust system. And as far as like the upcoming election, I've been, a Bernie person since 2015 or whenever he started running, and was bummed that Biden became the nominee. Ultimately, like I personally, like, to me, anyone can do whatever they want. I'm someone who is very much hoping that he will beat Trump, and so I'll be supporting him. But with the sort of crossed fingers that he only sticks around for 4 years, and then we get another opportunity to get someone whose ideals align a little more with mine and the people that I know, and in terms of kind of economic justice and against the, I don't know, kind of, he's very much a creature of like DC culture, and which isn't, not to say that everyone within that is a bad person, but someone like Bernie who exists beyond that and has fought his whole life for kind of justice for the people. It would be really refreshing to have that be a person who is the one kind of staffing the bureaucracy, if you will, because I think one of the most important things to me about it being Biden is just that the people who are in charge of the various wheels of government will no longer be, they'll no longer be actively trying to destroy it. Like if you think of, say, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, something like that, it's run by people who think it's unconstitutional, and so they're trying to throw as much sand in the gears as possible. And not that I think that someone like Biden will put someone in who's there for true justice, but they'll at least be a little less, pro-predatory loan companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's a despair to it, but for me personally, at the same time, it's just, as far as, the environment, as far as just corruption in general, like I'll take baby steps over backward steps. And I'm just worn out from the past 4 years of being frustrated and feeling helpless.
Yeah, seems like you still have some optimism that I've completely lost. Misty.
I don't blame you.
Yeah,
We're very
we could definitely
yeah,
go. We could definitely go into. I mean, we won't, but we could definitely go into our disdain for electoral politics and Joe Biden and Bernie Sanders as well. But I don't want to get bogged down in that right now. I want to focus more.
Yeah.
Wanted to focus more on the record and what the experience.
Honestly, I'm so grateful that you came on, because Jesse and I are so used to talking about like war and genocide and torture.
Yeah.
So it's very nice to have a break from that, to be able to talk about something awesome. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming on, man. We can wrap up here. Where can people find Nation of Language online?
We have like an Instagram. We have a Twitter. Although the handle is Notion of Anguish.
Yep.
Because Nation of Language is too long to be a Twitter handle. And so I figure I might as well just totally self-sabotage and name it. And I guess Facebook, we have a website, just nationoflanguage.com. And that's, the primary way to get vinyl or shirts and stuff like that, as well as a Bandcamp page.
And do you have any plans for any future plans for touring, in the event that this pandemic goes away?
There are some very tentative, like March 2021, I think, is our next official booked show, and hopefully we get to play it.
Because I've been seeing bands on Spotify who have shows set for August, and I think there's no way that's going to go down, especially with the recent spikes in the pandemic.
I think on our Spotify, it still might even list the show that we had. We had one that was booked for end of August that we were actually going to do. We were going to do 2 nights in a row, 2 shows a night, like a 6 p.m. show and a 9 p.m. show, and then the next day do that again.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds fun, but it sounds exhausting.
Yeah.
It does sound exhausting.
Yeah. So that I don't think is likely going to happen unless things change radically in the next.
Yeah.
Well, when you do tour, come to Ohio, please.
Oh, for sure.
I'll be there. I'll be there.
Really.
Ian, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Our guest, absolutely. Our guest today on this 12th episode is Ian Devaney. He is the frontman and songwriter for Nation of Language, which you can find at nationoflanguage.com or on Twitter at Notion of Anguish. And you can find the record on Spotify, iTunes, anywhere else?
Yeah, I think pretty much any streaming service, which I've been finding out there way more than I thought there were.
Yeah. And people, if they want to, they can purchase the vinyl and other merch from the website.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Ian, good luck out there. I hope this, like everybody, that this pandemic at least starts to peter out soon, and we can start going to shows again and actually see each other in person. But
and we'd love to have you back on if you do decide to tour. We'd love to have you back on, or if you have the next album come out, we would love to have you back on anytime. So
sure.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.
Great talking to you.
You
Thank
too.
you.
Take care.
See ya.